A Hot Day in Summer, Part 5. Written and read for you by SirTenTales. It had been days since the fire alarm incident in the student center, since the night Cherry held Emmett's arm for dear life and didn't let go. Since Emmett and Cherry almost... Emmett couldn't stop thinking about it. His mind was whirring like so many gears in a machine. On one hand, he thought he could finally tell Cherry how he felt, and probably she would feel the same way. On the other hand, Cherry seemed to want to get away from him so fast he couldn't imagine she felt the same way for him. Emmett checked his phone again. Still no text back from Cherry. He had sent a message to her the night of the fire alarm just to make sure she got home okay, and to check that she was okay since she left so quickly. Cherry sent a message back saying, "The Eagle has landed," her jokey way of saying she got back safely, but that was it. No answer to Emmett's other question. He didn't want to keep pestering her, so he left the message at that. He would talk to her again the next day, but the next day came, and he couldn't find her. All of their usual meeting places showed no sign of her. The cafeteria, the lounge, the library, the theater. No Cherry anywhere. He couldn't even hope to see her during build time in the theater, since the set was already constructed and there were only small tweaks that needed to be done. It seemed that every time he walked into the theater to do any last-minute fixes, Cherry had already gone. "She was here maybe 10 minutes ago," Ruby told Emmett when he asked her. Ruby had put down the stirring stick she was using. She was mixing a small container of very thick gray liquid when Emmett came in. She stood up and took a rag from her overalls pocket and wiped her hands. She looked very concerned at Emmett, like an older sister trying to parse out what is going on with her younger siblings. "You haven't seen her yet today, have you?" Ruby asked, her voice even. Emmett shook his head. He wasn't exactly sure what Ruby was getting at, but he knew she can be a lot more perceptive than most people around her. Ruby hummed. "And has she called you at all?" "She texted me a few times, but she didn't call, no," Emmett answered. "And she didn't say anything out of the ordinary to you?" "The last time we spoke, she kind of packed up her things really fast and left. Everything seemed normal to me, at least until then." "Darn that girl!" Ruby exclaimed, throwing the rag she held on the floor. Emmett was surprised by Ruby's outburst. Was he missing something? "Well, Emmett, I can tell you right now that," Ruby began to say, then stopped herself. She walked up to Emmett and patted him on the shoulder. "She'll tell you eventually." Ruby gave Emmett a warm smile and walked off the stage into the shop. That wasn't very helpful, Emmett thought. Or maybe it was? She'll tell you eventually. Tell him what? His mind was going 1,000 miles a minute. This would be so much easier if he could just talk to her. A few more days passed. Emmett at least received some emails from Cherry with pictures of the puppet progress. He looked at the screen of his laptop, absent-mindedly twirling his pen in his hand. This is good. She is talking to him in a way. Emmett tried replying to the emails, asking how she was doing. Each time, she would reply with "fine" and ask how he was. He would reply "fine," and the conversation stopped. Emmett was at a loss. Emmett was sitting in his last statistic methods class of the year. It had just ended with celebrations and study notes being passed around. Usually by this time of year, Cherry and Emmett would be planning study sessions for finals and choosing their courses for the next year. But it seemed like Cherry didn't want to do that. But she still contacted him. He must have messed up, Emmett thought. Emmett laid his head on the desk.
Hey, buddy, don't sleep here. It's bad for your back. Believe me, I know.
Emmett heard the familiar booming voice of Justin behind him as he walked down the steps of the lecture hall towards him. He raised his head. He had forgotten that Justin took the same class as him. Emmett took the course as an elective while Justin needed it to graduate.
Dude, who farted in your Lucky Charms?
Justin said. Emmett couldn't help the snicker that escaped his lips. Justin broke into a wide grin.
Ha! Gotcha!
He said triumphantly, and grabbed a chair from a nearby table and sat in it backwards. Right in the aisle. Everyone else was almost out the door, so it really didn't matter.
What's eating you, bud?
Emmett wasn't sure how to bring up the worry he felt over Cherry, so he just shrugged and said,
Finals are coming up, and I haven't seen Cherry in a while, and I haven't finished a lot of stuff, so I guess I'm stressed.
That came out as more of a question than an explanation.
Cherry's not good at talking sometimes. It's weird 'cause she talks a lot, especially to you, but she doesn't like talking,
Justin said, like he knew this all along and was just stating a fact. Did he ignore the other parts of Emmett's statement, or was he just observant?
She can talk to you easily, though. I don't know what you're doing, but keep doing it,
Justin said, tapping Emmett on the arm with his fist.
I don't think I'm doing anything,
Emmett said.
Actually, I think I made it worse.
A little quieter that time.
You're not, man. I'm sure of it.
Really?
Guaranteed,
Justin said with a thumbs up.
Well, 96% guaranteed. 86. Still a good percentage.
Emmett's shoulders slumped a little.
Look, man, what I know for sure is that Cherry won't stop talking to you.
Justin rose and slid the chair back into its place.
Make sure you're around for the after party of the show. I owe you a Coke.
He called over his shoulder and left the lecture hall. Emmett wasn't sure if this made him feel better or worse, but for what it was worth, Justin helped a little. It was showtime. The set they had spent weeks building was completely finished, and as the build crew and run crew, Emmett, Cherry, Clyde, and Moby sat in the backstage waiting for the next cue. Usually, during lulls of activity, they played silent cards while listening to their headsets for the standby from Ruby, but it was opening night, so they couldn't relax just yet. They had to make sure all the hiccups that came up in tech didn't happen again. Emmett would occasionally sneak glances at Cherry, or from what he could see of her in the low backstage light. They still hadn't talked much. At least it seemed like she wasn't avoiding him now. But he figured it was because they had a job to do, and Cherry was very serious about making sure she did her job well. So she didn't avoid Emmett, but she also didn't stick around Emmett too long. Every time there was a scene change, they moved together, swiftly and efficiently and wordlessly. They were very good at communicating without words. During the big mid-act scene change where the curtains even closed and more lights came on, Emmett almost put a set piece on the wrong mark. Cherry looked at him, and looked down, and looked back at him. Realizing his mistake, he walked back to the set piece and corrected it. It was a particularly awkward piece, so Cherry rushed over and helped him place it. Their hands touched for a brief second, and they looked at each other before they heard in their headsets,
Are you ready, kids?
From Ruby. She needed to hear the all clear from them before signaling Justin to pull the curtains. Cherry and Emmett left the stage and nodded to Moby, who gave Ruby the all clear. Emmett and Cherry sat on the floor against the wall of the backstage. Emmett noticed Moby narrow their eyes at him. He had a feeling they might scold him later for almost messing up the scene change. If Cherry took Run Crew seriously, Moby was a tyrant. Thankfully, they weren't a stage manager like Ruby. But Emmett couldn't blame them. He let his mind wander instead of focusing on the show, but he couldn't help it. Cherry was so close here, and he desperately wanted to talk to her. But he couldn't. Not backstage during a show where they had to be quiet as church mice. This was the only extended amount of time he had to see her and be near her. Every other time, a class, final prep, the parking deck, it was only passing hellos and updates on the puppet. And this was killing him. She didn't seem angry or upset or anything like that. He couldn't read anything in her face. He just noticed her winding her braid around her finger a lot more. And any time he tried to have a meaningful conversation with her, she was already off to her next class or on her way to anywhere else. All he wanted, all he needed was a clear answer from her. That's all. Whatever it was, he would accept it. But the trying to get an answer drove him mad. The show went off without a hitch. Well, except for the one senior who forgot most of his lines and skipped a whole page of cues, so Ruby needed to cover really fast. She chewed him out for it at the opening night party. But overall, the show went well. Only 2 more weekends of performances and they were done for the year. Finals were around the corner and everyone was making their summer plans. As far as plans with Cherry went, he knew that the puppet was going well, but he wasn't sure if the plans they had actually made were still on. He ran through the night of the lounge again and again in his head. He stood in the corner of the green room with a drink in his hand, untouched, still thinking. Cherry had already gone home, which wasn't like her. She said a swift congratulations and goodbye to everyone before she left, saying she had a lot of work to finish. There went Emmett's chance to talk to her. He wasn't sure what to do now. Cherry was avoiding him, but not avoiding him. It confused him to no end. "Are you waiting for that drink to cool down? 'Cause it's already cold," a voice said. Emmett shook himself out of his thoughts. He didn't notice Moby and Clyde were standing right in front of him until Moby had spoken. "Dude, where is your head tonight?" Moby asked, hands on hips, looking intensely at Emmett.
Sorry,
Emmett said sheepishly.
I've got a lot on my mind."
"No, you have one thing on your mind, and she's not even here." Emmett snapped to attention when Moby said that. "Yes, I know. It's as obvious as the nose on your face," Moby said quite triumphantly. Clyde made a sidelong glance at Moby. When Moby noticed, they dropped their hands from their hips and became a little more subdued. "Look, Emmett," Moby began, but stopped, as if they were trying to find the right words. When none came, Clyde stepped in.
"Cherry wants to talk to you,"
Clyde said, quite steadfastly. Emmett was struck by the sureness of his voice and his statement. "Yeah, Emmett, she does," Moby added.
I'm not trying to not talk to her."
Emmett was confused. Everyone seemed to know something except him. "No, we know you're not. We just see that she is avoiding you. But we can also see that she is trying to not avoid you," Moby tried to explain.
"That makes no sense."
"That's what I said!" Moby exclaimed. "Every time she walks into the theater, she's looking around for you. She asked us if we've seen you every time. You know that stage tech class we all have together? She waited in the hall until you walked in, all the time acting like she was going to go up to talk to you before class started. She keeps asking about you, and I said, 'Why don't you talk to him yourself, girl?' And she keeps saying, 'I want to.' And that's it. It's irritating." Moby took in a breath and let out a long, frustrated sigh after that. "I love you both, but for frick's sake!" Clyde put a hand on Moby's shoulder and squeezed it, calming them down.
"You're going to have to be the one to talk to her," Clyde said. "You think I don't want to? Of course I want to. I've had so much to tell her for so long."
Emmett trailed off. He sighed in desperation.
"How?"
he said, mostly to himself. Moby and Clyde looked at each other. A devious grin spread on Moby's face, and Clyde raised his eyebrows. "I have a plan," Moby said. It was late June. Emmett stood outside of the library building 7:45 p.m. Classes ended for the year. The show closed and finals were finished. Courses for next semester had been chosen. Emmett still held out hope for the summer plan Cherry had proposed, so he would start the pre-med summer class the day after tomorrow. He'd been dreading taking this course, but a summer with Cherry was worth it, if he was lucky enough to have it. According to Moby's plan, Cherry was supposed to meet Emmett here tonight after some, as they put it, cleverly placed walls. "Like leading a mouse to the exit in a maze," they had said. Emmett didn't understand exactly what they meant, but he trusted his friends, so here he would wait. And he didn't have to wait long. Ding dong! Emmett heard a voice and felt a touch on his shoulder. He turned around, and there she was, Cherry, with a large purple sequin dragon puppet on her shoulder. "Hey!" she breathed. "Hi," he whispered. For a long minute, they just stood there and looked at each other. Neither moved. Neither spoke. Then, "Cherry, Emmett," they both said at the same time. They chuckled. "You go first," she said. No, you," he said back. Cherry opened her mouth to speak, but closed it again. Looking down, she looked up and tried again, but no words came out. "The puppet looks amazing," Emmett said, pointing to the dragon head that enclosed Cherry's hand. "Oh yeah? Do you like her?" she said excitedly. "The sequin dress you got really makes the scales pop, and the trouble with the head sculpt we had seemed to have resolved itself when I put the fabric on, and I love the tail you sculpted." She turned around to show the long body and stunning tail of the dragon, the spikes perfectly straight down the spine and the tail swaying with ease. "It looks awesome. You did amazing work," Emmett said with a smile. She turned back around to face him. "Well, I couldn't have done it without you, Emmett," she said. "Cherry, he began. "If I did something wrong, just tell me." What?" Cherry replied, surprise and worry clear on her face. "You've been avoiding me for weeks." No, You did nothing wrong," Cherry said. Emmett released a breath he didn't know he was holding. "I just thought you didn't want to see me much," she said, her voice trailing off. "What the hell made you think that?" he asked. He couldn't understand. He was desperate to see her again, to talk to her again. How could she think he wouldn't want to? Cherry looked down. "I don't know, she began to say in a small voice. Then, "Say, did I show you that I learned ventriloquism?" she said excitedly. Cherry raised the puppet in front of her face and moved the mouth to speak, making her own voice squeaky for the dragon's speaking voice. "And I'm quite good at it," the squeaky dragon said. "Are you now?" "Oh, yes. And since I'm here, I might as well talk to you." "Okay." "Well, Miss Cherry over here wanted to say she was sorry," the dragon said. Emmett's heart dropped. "Sorry for what?" "For being a scaredy cat for weeks. Mr. Emmett has been so kind and caring to her, but she just keeps running away. Miss Cherry thinks you're really cool, Mr. Emmett. You're really smart, and your ideas are really interesting. You're lots of fun to hang out with, and Miss Cherry always feels like she can talk to you. But she keeps running away like a scaredy cat." "Well, why can't she talk to me now?" Emmett asked the puppet. "Because she doesn't know what to say now." The squeaky dragon voice was gone, and it was Cherry's voice again. "She doesn't know how to say that Emmett is really special to her, that she wants to spend all of her time with Emmett, that she likes Emmett very, very much. Cherry shrank her shoulders behind the puppet. Emmett's heart raced. He thought he knew what she meant, but he wanted to be sure. He gently put his hand on the puppet's head that housed Cherry's hand. He lowered it away from Cherry's face. Her eyes were lowered, but she slowly moved them up to meet his face.
I'm really dense, Cherry. I need you to tell me clearly,
Emmett said. I really, really like you, Emmett, Cherry finally said. I mean, I really like you. More than like you. It's like my heart is filled with you, and I just...
Just what?
I don't want to make a mess of this or be stupid and just lay this feeling at your feet, so I've been trying not to say anything, but then that night in the lounge just kind of jet propelled it, and oh, fuck! Cherry sighed in exasperation and turned to walk away. Emmett quickly caught her by the arm.
Hold on, Cherry, he said.
I don't want to put you in a weird position, so just forget I said anything. If you don't like me, she said quickly.
Cherry, I do like you.
As a friend, I know. That's totally fine. Just forget it.
No, Cherry, I'm not going to forget it.
Emmett stepped in front of her, preventing her escape.
I like you more than just a friend.
His hands held her arms gently and firm, so she wouldn't run away.
Do you know how long I've liked you? Almost since the day I met you.
Oh, really? Cherry said, dumbfounded. Then in a whisper, wait, what? He looked into her eyes with assuredness and resolve, and he said,
I love you, Cherry.
Emmett felt Cherry's arms tremble. Her eyes kept his gaze, but she said nothing. She looked very much like a deer in the headlights.
Cherry.
Emmett said her name gently. Are you serious? Her voice was strained and quiet.
Yes,
he replied. Everything stilled. Emmett could hear his racing heart in his ears. Cherry finally took a breath after what seemed like a minute.
Can I kiss you?
Emmett asked. She nodded with a soft yes. Then, more emphatically, she said, yes. As Cherry raised her arms to encircle Emmett's chest, they both realized the large sequin puppet still encased Cherry's arm. They both had completely forgotten it was there. They looked at it and started laughing. This would be the kind of situation for them. It was strange and funny and magical. Cherry tried shaking her hand out of the puppet, but it proved difficult. She gave it a few more good shakes before Emmett took her face in both of his hands, leaned down, and gently placed his lips on hers. Her eyes fell closed and she leaned into the kiss. Heat radiated to Emmett's ears as he gently pulled the dragon from Cherry's arm, freeing her hand. He let the puppet drop to the ground, and Cherry's hands glided up his chest to grip the back of his neck, and she pulled him closer. It felt warm and inviting, and Emmett could hear his pulse in his ears. He could feel her close to him, so close to him, and he never wanted to let go. When they both pulled away, panting ever so slightly, they smiled at each other and chuckled. After all this time, was it really this simple? To tell someone that you love, that you do? Emmett smiled at Cherry, admiring her, and said,
You could have told me sooner.
Cherry stepped back from his touch and picked up the puppet from the ground. She gave him 2 swift, playful hits with the dragon before saying, You meanie, through laughter.
Hey, you're going to ruin her,
he replied, laughing and putting his hands up in mock surrender. I'll ruin you in a second, she shrieked, hitting him again. Emmett grabbed the puppet before she could get in another hit and pulled it away from her. He gave her lips a swift, soft kiss. Cherry's face broke into a broad smile, grabbed his shirt, and pulled him in for another kiss. The poor dragon had lost some of its sequins, but between the two of them, it could easily be fixed. "Oh, so next project," Cherry began as she examined the dragon's back. Emmett looked at her in surprise.
"Next project? Already?"
"Yeah, silly. That's why I signed up for that pre-law summer course." She grabbed his hand and tucked the puppet under her arm. Together they walked to their favorite spot, the parking deck, talking and planning together like they always have, but this time with something new and magical between them. I hope you've enjoyed listening to A Hot Day in Summer, written and read to you by me, SirTenTales. If you like this story, let me know, and I hope to tell you more stories soon. Bye.